So you grew up in Chicago?
Born and raised in Chicago. Yep.
What was that experience like?
Oh, well, Chicago, growing up in Chicago in the 1960s, couldn't ask for a better environment to grow up in. I don't know how much you know about Chicago, but Chicago was, when I was growing up, it still is the most racially segregated city in the United States. So growing up, coming of age in the 1960s was left an indelible impression on me and shaped the way I view how I negotiate life. So it was wonderful. I survived. I was one of a handful of Black men on my block who survived. And the key for survival for me was leaving Chicago, coming to Washington, D.C. to attend Howard University. And that was 50 years ago. And I've never been back. I mean, I've lived here ever since. I still have family in Chicago, but yeah, that's my story.
Right on. So what was the turning point to start deciding or start studying African history?
It wasn't until after I graduated from college, after I graduated from Howard University. And the turning point was 21st of February, 1977, when I saw Dr. Ivan Van Sertima for the first time. He had just published his book, They Came Before Columbus, and talked about ancient Egyptians who navigated the Atlantic Ocean and brought technology and culture to the Americas 2,500 years before Columbus. And he said that the ancient Egyptians were Black. And that was the first time in my life I had ever heard anyone say that the ancient Egyptians were Black. It had contradicted everything that I had learned in every school that I had attended. And I began searching for what I refer to now as forbidden history, and found a world of knowledge that had intentionally been withheld from me throughout all of my years of formal education. So I began the process of re-educating myself, reading, traveling, and ultimately writing, and some would say making history myself.
Right on. I was really excited when I saw it was you, because I've seen, you know, growing up in DC, I've seen your face countless times. But
when were you in DC? What years?
I was born in '83. I was born in Fairfax Hospital.
Okay, 83. You're a year younger than my daughter. Got it.
And my father has lived in Northeast my entire life. My sister went to Duke Ellington.
Okay, sure.
So that's my home, you know.
Absolutely.
So when did you realize you had done something and made a difference?
Well, when did I realize? I can say that I realized early in my life that if I was going to make a difference, I was going to have to assume responsibility for doing that myself. And that began when I quit my job and started my own business. That was in 1979. So I've been self-employed since 1979. And what I began doing was working to make money to do the things that gave my life meaning. And what gave my life meaning was learning about African history and culture, buying books, reading books, studying, traveling to conferences to meet the authors of the books that I've read, and then traveling myself. And I wound up creating my second business 39 years ago, which is IKG. And that's the business which has led to my writing, organizing conferences, lectures, seminars, and now has culminated in my financing the excavation of 3 tombs in Egypt for the last 12 and a half years.
Yeah.
Good reason.
So how do we get Black people to embrace this knowledge?
Look, you get Black people or people in general to embrace this information by presenting it to them in an easy to understand and easily digestible manner. You get them to embrace the knowledge the same way they embrace anything else. Repetition, 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 finding ways to pique their curiosity and then leading them to information that will expand their curiosity until they find something an area that they admire, have an interest in, and then they will do the deep dive and take a greater interest. It's simply a matter, for me, it's simply a matter of opening a door and reaching out to those people who are ready to learn. Not everybody is ready to learn. Not everybody has the desire or the capacity to learn. And knowing that helps you minimize your frustration by, there's a t-shirt that I saw last year that I guess will become one of my buzzwords. Never argue with anyone that Harriet would have left behind. So I'm very clear that this information is not for everybody. Some people don't want to learn, just as some people didn't want to leave the concentration camp on the eastern shore of Maryland, where Harriet had been brutalized. And so she left them behind. Some folk don't get it. And I've lived long enough to, so you're what, 37 going on 38. So I've lived long enough, I'll be 70 this year. So I've lived long enough to know that there's some folk who will never get it. And it's not about being foolish enough or naive enough to think that everybody's going to get it. That's unrealistic. You want to work with those folk who understand what the issues are and are willing to commit themselves to something bigger than themselves. Those are the people that are worth engaging. And others, you just leave them to their own devices.
So where would you say, like a person like myself, in my journey for this knowledge, where would you suggest that I start?
Well, I would say start at the beginning, but the beginning is different for different people. You know, it depends on what your experiences have been. It depends on what your interests are. What I have found is that my very first book, From the Browder File, which is what, 34 years old now, is still a perennial bestseller. It has been sold by bookstores, used in high schools, colleges, universities around the world because it is a good beginning book. It's a door opener. 22 short essays with bibliography at the end of each essay. And people can find a topic that is of interest to them and then do a deeper dive in that topic based on reading some of the references that I recommend. So you meet people where they are and be willing to provide guidance as they ask for it. And as they learn and grow, then they will find an area of interest to them and expand the knowledge of African people as a collective.
Okay. So I am in a mixed race relationship.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important for me, for my child to understand, you know, they're mixed, obviously, but it's very important for my child to feel comfortable with their blackness. What would you say for people in these relationships on all sides? What would your advice be to them?
Well, to be honest, living in America, we know that a mixed race child, despite the amount of melanin that they have in their skin, is going to be viewed by the dominant people in this society, i.e. white folk, as Black, not mixed. And that's a reality. So explaining that to a child is difficult. And being Black does not mean, being mixed race does not mean that child has to decide between which parent they're going to identify with. It places more of a burden on the child because of the nature of the society in which we live. And what that requires is that parents of adults in mixed race relationships have to be honest with themselves. It's one thing to fall in love. It's another thing to bring children into a racist environment and expect your love to protect that child. Knowledge and truthfulness is what will prepare any child to negotiate the world in which they live. And so I'm not one who believes in fantasies. You know, this is not a world, this is not a society where I feel people can pretty much do whatever they want to do. You have to think of the long-term implications of your actions, your long-term implications that affects multiple generations.
Okay. I just have one more question, or actually, I'm just curious if you have a statement that you'd like for people, because I live in Eugene, Oregon, and I don't know if you're familiar with Eugene, Oregon. It was tough. I came from Northeast DC, so it took me a while.
Right.
What advice would you have for people who might be coming behind me into environments like this?
Well, look, my approach toward history and writing and life is based on my own personal experiences. I grew up on the west side of Chicago, all Black community, segregated community. When I was sophomore in high school, my mother and I moved from the west side of Chicago to Oak Park, Illinois. We were the second African-American family to move to Oak Park, Illinois in 1966. I did 3 years of high school at Oak Park River Forest High School, where I was the only Black person in all of my classes. There were only 2 Black folk in the entire school with a student population of over 3,000. So I understand the importance of, I understand being isolated. And I was fortunate in that I came to that situation in Oak Park after having been grounded in a Black environment where I went to Black doctors. I had a Black dentist. I had Black ophthalmologists. I had Black dermatologists. So I saw Black people's lives in meaningful and positive ways. And I've always eschewed stereotypes of Black folk in the media and in general society. So it's important for people to know the truth and not believe many of the falsehoods that predominate this society, falsehoods that are written in the history books. You know, you mentioned Oregon. Oregon was established as a whites-only state. You know, that's part of the history of Oregon. So anyone moving to Oregon or anyone moving anywhere needs to know where they're moving. It needs to know what you're going to be in for. And if you're prepared to deal with that, then go into that situation prepared to deal with it. But I pity the person who jumps into a situation without having done their homework. That person is going to be psychologically, emotionally, spiritually abused. And I'm not one for abuse, particularly self-abuse. So for me to know yourself, to become aware of who you are, and to allow that knowledge to shape how you view yourself, how you view the world, and how you view your interactions with others is paramount. If you don't know yourself, if you don't know who you are and what you have the capacity to do, then you will harbor feelings of inferiority. You will be ashamed of the so-called race because of stereotypes that are perpetuated in society. So for me, one of the most important things that you can learn to do as a person of African ancestry is to know who you are, to know the history of your people, not just the struggles of your people here in America over the last 401 years, but to know what we've done 4,001 years ago. To know what we're not taught in school, which requires that you have to invest some time in yourself. And anyone who is not willing to invest time in themselves, knowing themselves and perfecting themselves so that they can bring the best of them into any situation they go, anyone who's not willing to do that is like that person that Harriet leaves behind. You know, not everybody is going to make it. Not everybody is on the same level. And if you're serious about life, then I would think that you would want to commit yourself to something bigger and greater than yourself and make a contribution to the world, make a contribution to your community, make a contribution to your family and your people, so that when you are no longer here, people can say that they're appreciative of the fact that you were here and you left a mark on the world. That to me is what makes life worth living.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't know what Oregon was like before I came here. I wish I'd done more research, but you know, I've made a comfortable life for myself, largely because I knew who I was and where I came from.
Mhm.
But you know, it's been hard. I'll say that.
Well, life is hard. Life is not easy,
But
but life is not easy. But I've learned from my own experiences, life is as hard as you make it, and the more knowledge you have, the easier you can make life for yourself. So for me, the attainment and the acquisition of knowledge is one of the best gifts that we could ever bestow upon ourselves, and one of the best gifts that we could ever give our children. So to that point, before we close, to that point, that's one of the reasons why I, as a single parent who never knew my father, when I divorced my wife, I got custody of my daughter. And I have been raising my daughter since she was 4 years old for two reasons. One, I never wanted my daughter to grow up not knowing her father. And then also I began taking my daughter to Africa with me when she was 7 years old, because I wasn't going to allow her to be miseducated as I was miseducated. And so my daughter traveled to me when she was 7. When she was 8, we wrote her first book. So my daughter at the age of 8 in 1991 was the youngest published author in America. So she's been traveling around the country, traveling all the world, lecturing about her travels to Africa. And so by the time she went to high school, by the time she went to college, she had written 2 books about her travels to Africa. For the last 10 years, she's been excavating tombs with me in Egypt. So I'm the type of person who believes in taking responsibility for myself and for my family, and doing the things that I know will benefit myself and my family. So if I can model that for other people, then that would be a beautiful legacy for me.